Deputy Aylward has 30 seconds to introduce his question.
I want to ask the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government the measures being taken to ensure that small and medium enterprises are not adversely affected by commercial rate revaluations, and I will make a statement on that matter.
2 minutes.
Thank you, Lascan Corlin, and thank you, Deputy, for the question. Local authorities are under a statutory obligation to levy rates on any property used for commercial purposes in accordance with the details entered in the valuation list prepared by the Independent Commissioner of Valuation under the Valuation Acts of 2001 to 2015. The Commissioner of Valuation has responsibility for valuation matters, including the revaluation of properties, and is independent in the performance of his functions under the Acts. The levying and collection of rates are matters for each individual local authority. The Valuation Acts provide for the revaluation of all rateable property within a rating authority area so as to reflect changes in value due to economic factors such as business turnover, differential movements in property values or other external factors and changes in the local business environment. It's not the purpose of a revaluation to increase the total amount of commercial rates collected by local authorities. Indeed, Section 56 of the Valuation Acts of 2001 to 2015 provides that the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government, having obtained the consent of the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, is obliged to make an order directing a rating authority to limit the overall amount of income it could raise through rates in the year following a revaluation to the total amount of rates liable to be paid to it in the previous year, plus buoyancy arising from the valuations determined in the year of a revaluation of newly constructed property and adjusted for inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index. Rate limitation orders have been made in each of the local authorities that have undergone a revaluation to date, and further orders will be made in respect of future revaluations as they arise. Thank you.
Deputy Aylward is 1 minute.
This is a huge issue. The dramatic increase in commercial rates are crippling SMEs across the country. Our small independent businesses are the backbone of our economy. We need to encourage our SMEs to grow and expand in order to create jobs, especially in the regions. We must take urgent action on this issue. You recently stated to me in this House that the Commercial Rates Bill is currently being drafted. What is the status of this legislation? We need to get it published as soon as possible. Fianna Fáil introduced a bill into Dáil previously, proposed that the level of increase being levelled on an individual basis, business be capped. We also proposed that any increase should be allowed to be staggered at the discretion of the local authority over a 5-year period. This will mean an increase is limited and spread over time rather than the current process of a single large increase. There is also a clear need for a form and appeal mechanism for businesses to the local authority to restructure debt repayments on the basis of an inability to pay. The Government could also consider offering the choice of direct debit payments rather than 2 tranches of payments to help business cope with cash flow issues. I personally think turnover and square metres could and should be considered. Will the Minister consider these proposals as the formation of the Commercial Rates Bill continue within his department?
Minister, 1 minute. After this.
Thank you, Lascan Corlin, and thank you, Deputy, for his follow-up questions. Just in relation to the valuation process and when it happens, because it happened in my own local authority, there are, generally speaking, more winners than losers when this happens in terms of people seeing their actual rateable valuation decrease versus those who see it increase. It's roughly a 60-40 split or a 65-35 split, so 65% would actually see them paying less as a result, because in some local authority areas, as you know, this work really hasn't been done in a very, very long time, and it's to make sure that there's actual fairness across the system so that some people aren't carrying a historic burden for meeting the rates needs of the local authority area. So it's a very important piece of work that does go on. If someone feels that there's been a mistake made in that process, of course there's an appeal mechanism which they can follow up on. That is independent of me and independent of my office. In relation to the rates bill, I did raise this with the Attorney General last week. I raised it with him again today. It is a priority legislation for us. It won't be going through pre-legislative scrutiny, so once we actually have it drafted and ready to go, we can come straight into the Dáil. I had hoped to see it published later this month. More than likely, it'll be the beginning of next month. It's a very important bill. It's going to give greater enforcement powers to local authorities, but it's going to allow them to achieve what you want them to achieve, which is the ability for them to bring in rates alleviation measures to recognise where certain areas need a bit more help to come up for whatever reason, and to reduce some of that burden that's there on local businesses. In terms of having the rates based on something like turnover, the risk there is that it's not a very consistent base for a local authority to be able to plan into the future in terms of how much money might be coming in a given year. I'd much rather focus on giving them greater enforcement powers so they can collect more than they're collecting today. Some local authorities do this very well, other local authorities don't do it very well. Thank you.
I accept that there's 5%, maybe perhaps around there, that get a reduction. But I'm talking about the people that have an increase. And because the revaluation, I'm sorry about hogging on about this now, this is my second time raised in the last father. But the reason is because I'm being contacted by business, local business in Kilkenny, because the revaluation has been conducted in the last 12 months. And there are people come to me, business people come to me with increases of 400, they give me the facts, 400, 300 and 200%. I mean, that's too much for a business to take in one go. These are small, medium enterprises such as publicans is one. Creche, child mining would have to pay no rates one time. Now they're all of a sudden, and I had a beauticians. These are small business barely surviving, and to say that 1 year they're paying €600 and within a revaluation they're paying 2,400 per annum. This is too much of an increase in one go. I'm asking the Minister to change the system, to bring in over 5 years, to give these businesses a chance to breathe and to get up to where to 2,000 or to 2,400 for an example, instead of going from 1,600 to 2,400 in one go, and that's only an example. So we need to look at that. There's 3 businesses that are closing down already in High Street in Kilkenny since Christmas. Now, I'm not saying it's about race, it could be other reasons, but that's a sign. We need these SMEs. They're the backbone of the employment of this country, and we need them.
We got supplementary from